So, um, if I asked you to point to a joint in your body, you'd probably just, bend your knee or maybe roll your shoulder.
Right, because we naturally tend to assume that a joint implies movement.
Exactly. But what if I told you that the rigid plates encasing your brain and the teeth anchored in your jaw actually operate under the exact same anatomical classification?
Yeah, biologically speaking, a joint is really just a meeting place. It's where bones meet.
And that is our mission for today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are exploring exactly that, where bones meet. We're going to unpack the really complex anatomy and physiology of human joints.
And we've pulled together a pretty massive stack of sources for this one. Everything from classic anatomical texts to historical medical documents dating back centuries, plus some really cutting-edge biomechanical research.
It's just wild how something that seems so fundamental, literally just two bones touching, gets so complicated once you look under the hood.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, studying joints isn't just about memorizing a bunch of Latin terms. It's this incredible look into brutal evolutionary trade-offs, microscopic biological quirks, and a classification system that has survived for literally thousands of years.
Right. And to even understand why something like a tooth is categorized alongside your knee, we have to look at how humans first started categorizing the body, which apparently takes us from ancient battlefields to this really persistent naming mismatch that still confuses medical students today.
Yeah, if we look at the origins of medicine, joint study is actually one of the oldest branches of anatomy because, in the ancient world, they didn't have MRI machines.
No, definitely not.
They had sudden physical emergencies, and two emergencies in particular really drove early joint science, which were childbirth and battlefield trauma.
So we're talking dislocations, severe fractures, things like that.
Exactly. Brutal, urgent problems that required immediate physical solutions. They were categorizing things based entirely on what they had to fix with their bare hands.
And we see the evidence of this, right, in the Hippocratic corpus, like
Yeah.
from ancient Greece around the 5th century BCE.
Yes, there's a specific treatise in there called On the Articulations, or Periarthron. It remains one of the most detailed surgical documents to survive from antiquity.
Wow.
Yeah, it describes step by step how to reduce a dislocated shoulder, a dislocated jaw, a dislocated hip. The ancient Greeks essentially distinguished joints by how they mechanically failed under stress.
Which is a super pragmatic way to look at it, just functional classification.
Hmm.
But then we get to the naming scheme that actually stuck, which brings us to Galen of Pergamon around 130 CE.
Right, physician to Roman emperors.
Yeah, and he treated this three-way naming scheme that we actually still use the roots of today: synarthrosis, amphiarthrosis, and diarthrosis. But wait, I was reading the sources, and they mentioned that human dissection was basically outlawed in Rome during Galen's time.
It was, yeah.
So if he's mapping out human joint mechanics to create this foundational system, what was he actually looking at?
Well, he was largely dissecting animals, mostly Barbary macaques and pigs.
Pigs? You're kidding.
Pigs and monkeys. He documented their joint structures in meticulous detail, and then he just, extrapolated those findings to human anatomy in his text. He just assumed the internal mechanics were identical.
So he literally wrote the medical textbook on human bones by looking at a macaque.
Pretty much.
And the wildest part to me is that his classification went entirely unchallenged for over 1,300 years, mostly because subsequent generations just weren't allowed to check his work on actual human cadavers.
Right, that paradigm didn't break until Andreas Vesalius came along. He was a Flemish anatomist, and in 1543 he published this monumental book called De Humani Corporis Fabrica.
Right, on the fabric of the human body.
Exactly. And he corrected roughly 200 of Galen's long-standing errors.
Because Vesalius was actually dissecting executed criminals in Padua, Italy, which is a bit macaque. But it finally grounded anatomical science in human reality.
Yeah, he took it a step further. He didn't throw out Galen's joint classification entirely, but he did completely overhaul the underlying skeletal anatomy it was built on, because Galen's pig-based descriptions simply didn't match the geometry of real human bodies.
So that brings us to the modern terminology, which was officially codified much later, right? In 1998, by the Terminologia Anatomica.
That's right.
And this is where we get the dual classification system, which honestly is where a lot of the confusion starts.
Yeah.
Because we categorize joints by their structure and then separately by their function.
Yeah, structurally, you're asking what physical material is binding the bones together. So you have fibrous joints, which use dense connective tissue and have no joint cavity.
Okay.
Then cartilaginous joints connected by cartilage, also lacking a cavity. And finally, synovial joints, which feature a fluid-filled cavity and a surrounding capsule.
Right. And then functionally you ask, well, how much do they move? Which goes all the way back to Galen's terms. Synarthrosis means immovable, amphiarthrosis means slightly movable, and diaphoresis means freely movable. I was actually trying to think of why we need both systems, and the best analogy I could come up with is cars. So sorting joints by structure, fibrous, cartilaginous, synovial, is like sorting cars by what they are made of, steel, aluminum, carbon fiber.
Okay, I like that.
But then sorting them by function is like sorting them by how fast they go, like a daily commuter sedan versus a Formula One race car. You'd think all the carbon fiber cars are race cars and all the steel cars are sedans, but the two systems just don't neatly align.
No, they don't. And honestly, the mismatched edge cases are where anatomical mechanics get truly fascinating. Like, take the tooth, which we mentioned at the very beginning.
Right.
The joint between a tooth and its jaw socket is called a gomphosis. Structurally, it is a fibrous joint. It's anchored super securely by the periodontal ligament. So your tooth is a joint, but functionally it is a synarthrosis. It shouldn't move.
Yeah, if your tooth is moving like a race car, you really need to see a dentist immediately.
Exactly. But then you have the spine. The intervertebral discs are cartilaginous joints called a symphysis. Now, individually, if you look at just two vertebrae, they barely move at all.
Right, they're pretty stiff.
But structurally, they allow this cumulative slight movement and amphiarthrosis. You stack enough of them together and suddenly you can bend over and touch your toes.
Wow. And we also see these weird edge cases in trauma, right?
Yeah.
Like the distal tibiofibular joint, the one connecting your shin bones right above the ankle.
Oh, yeah, the syndesmosis.
Right, structurally it's fibrous. And in most parts of the body, fibrous means rigid stability, like zero movement. But biomechanically, this specific joint requires a tiny, essential bit of give just to absorb the shock of walking or running.
Yeah, and that's the danger zone. When an athlete plants their foot and forces that joint past its tiny permitted range of give, the fibrous tissue tears. And that is the exact physical mechanism of a high ankle sprain.
It's crazy. The very definition of a joint is just this messy spectrum. But because they are classified by both movement and structure, there is this fundamental physical law that dictates how every single joint in your body is engineered.
Yes, the grand trade-off.
Right, moving freely versus staying put.
The organizing logic of a joint is entirely mechanical. The amount of movement a joint allows is a direct inverse trade-off against the stability it provides.
So you can't have both.
Exactly. More dense connective material and less empty cavity space equals a rigid, highly stable joint. But more cavity space and a looser surrounding capsule equals a joint that moves beautifully in multiple directions, but is incredibly vulnerable to dislocation.
So every joint just sits somewhere on this sliding scale. And the sources highlight this perfectly with the tale of two ball and socket joints, the shoulder and the hip.
It's a classic comparison.
Yeah. They're both synovial joints. They're both diarthroses, meaning freely movable. But they are completely opposite in how they handle that mechanical trade-off.
Well, let's start with the shoulder, the glenohumeral joint. It is highly mobile. It actually boasts the greatest range of motion of any joint in the entire human body.
Which is awesome until you fall on it.
Right. Because the socket, the glenoid cavity, is incredibly shallow. It covers only about a third of the humeral head, which is the ball of the arm bone.
It's so weird to picture. Instead of a ball sitting deeply inside a cup, the texts make it sound way more like balancing a heavy bowling ball on a tiny flat saucer.
That is a perfect visual, and because of that, you have to strap it down with a massive web of tightly stretched bungee cords.
Which are the rotator cuff muscles and ligaments.
Exactly. The body basically outsources the structural stability to the soft tissue, and because of that specific structural choice, the shoulder is the most commonly dislocated major joint.
Now contrast that architecture with the hip, also a ball and socket. But its socket, the acetabulum, is remarkably deep.
It is. It nearly completely encloses the head of the femur, locking it right into the pelvis.
Like a golf ball sitting perfectly inside a teacup.
Exactly. And the mechanical result is far less range of motion than the shoulder, obviously, but massive load-bearing stability. You rarely see a dislocated hip outside of severe high-energy trauma.
Like a high-speed car crash or a really major fall.
Right.
But, this naturally makes me wonder, if the shoulder is so prone to popping out and the hip is so beautifully stable, why didn't human anatomy just evolve a deeper socket for the shoulder? Like, why not have hip-level stability in our arms?
Well, it all comes down to evolutionary priorities. Humans are primates, right? The evolutionary imperative for our upper limbs was maximum reach, brachiation, meaning swinging from branches,
Okay.
and eventually the ability to throw objects with high velocity. I mean, you cannot throw a spear, pitch a baseball, or reach a high branch if your arm bone is locked into a deep restrictive cup like the hip.
That makes total sense.
The hip has to bear the compressive weight of our entire upper body while we walk, so it absolutely prioritizes rigid stability. The shoulder prioritizes dynamic range. Joint design is incredibly purposeful.
So it's not a flaw, it's a feature. We sacrifice shoulder stability just so we could survive in our environment. But these mechanical trade-offs aren't just static blueprints that you're born with and stuck with forever, right?
No, not at all.
Because the sources show instances where the body actively alters these structures on the fly to survive very specific biological events.
The infant skull is probably the most dramatic physiological example of this.
Oh, man, yeah.
When a baby is born, the bony plates of the skull are not fused together yet. They're connected by fibrous sutures with these wide gaps, what we commonly call fontanelles or soft spots.
Which is terrifying, but it allows the skull to literally compress and overlap slightly during childbirth. Without those gaps, the mechanics of human birth would just fail completely.
Exactly. And then post-birth, those fibrous gaps allow the cranial vault to rapidly expand as the infant's brain triples in size over the first 2 years of life.
But they don't stay that way.
No, eventually the biological imperative shifts from expansion to protection. So by 18 to 24 months, the anterior fontanelle closes. The fibrous sutures gradually ossify, meaning they turn to solid bone, in a process called synostosis.
So what was once a dynamic shifting puzzle basically becomes maximum armor synothrosis.
Right. It goes from a highly mobile joint to a completely solid vault.
That's incredible. Another dynamic shift from the sources is the pregnant pelvis, specifically the pubic symphysis. This is a cartilaginous amphiarthrosis connecting the front of your pelvis. Normally, it barely moves at all.
But during pregnancy, the body releases a hormone that is appropriately named relaxin.
I love that name.
It's very literal. This hormone specifically targets and alters the molecular structure of the fibrocartilage and the ligaments in the pelvis, literally loosening them.
Just chemically tuning the joint.
Yeah, it allows the pubic symphysis to widen measurably, sometimes by several millimeters, just to increase the internal diameter of the pelvic outlet for childbirth.
The body just chemically adjusting a joint's mobility for a single biological event is amazing. Though the sources do note that if this loosening becomes excessive, it causes symphysis pubis dysfunction, or SPD, which is extremely painful.
Yeah, the trade-off scale tips way too far toward mobility, and the person loses the basic pelvic stability needed to just walk around.
So chemical tuning is one way to alter mechanics. But look at joints that have to dynamically alter their own mechanics thousands of times a day just to keep us standing upright. Which brings us to a major anatomical debate mentioned in the texts, the knee.
Right. We typically model the knee as a basic hinge, but biomechanically it defies standard synovial classification entirely.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the knee actually doesn't fit neatly into any of the 6 standard synovial joint subtypes. It's predominantly a hinge, sure, but as the knee approaches full extension, like when your leg straightens out completely, it relies on this functionally vital, tiny rotational component.
Okay.
Orthopedists refer to this as the screw-home mechanism.
I picture it kind of like a specialized deadbolt or one of those bayonet mounts on a camera lens. Like it doesn't just push in, it actually twists to lock completely into place.
That's exactly what it does. That final subtle twist gives the leg rigid structural stability so you can stand for long periods of time without your thigh muscles constantly having to fire just to keep you upright.
And this isn't just academic pedantry, right? It actually dictates modern medical engineering.
Oh, absolutely. This debate matters hugely for orthopedic surgeons who are designing artificial knee replacement.
Because if an engineer designs a prosthetic knee as a pure, simple hinge and just ignores that twisting screw-home mechanism, what happens?
The patient ends up with a highly unnatural, highly painful gait. The titanium prosthetic is literally physically fighting the body's natural biomechanics with every single step.
Wow. Because joints are this complex central hub of human movement surrounded by ligaments, a vascular cartilage, synovial fluid.
Yeah.
They're also a huge magnet for some of the most persistent medical myths out there.
Oh, yeah.
Let's look at the double-jointed myth. Structurally, no one has extra joints.
Right. From a strict anatomical perspective, absolutely no one has an extra joint. Double-jointed is a complete misnomer.
Okay, so what are we actually seeing then?
What you are observing is joint hypermobility.
So what is actually failing at a microscopic level to allow someone to just bend their thumb completely backward to touch their wrist.
It comes down to the architecture of their collagen. So collagen is the primary structural protein in ligaments and joint capsules.
Right.
In hypermobile individuals, a genetic quirk alters the triple helix structure of the collagen protein itself. So instead of acting like a taut steel cable that abruptly halts movement, the faulty collagen acts way more like a frayed rubber band.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it stretches excessively, which allows the joint to move way beyond the typical biological range without immediately dislocating.
And the sources explicitly mention Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and Marfan syndrome here. In those cases, the extreme joint laxity isn't just a fun party trick. It brings chronic joint pain, constant debilitating dislocations, and severe cardiovascular risk.
Oh, because the collagen defect is systemic. It's a reminder that joints don't exist in a vacuum. They rely on the integrity of the connective tissue system as a whole.
So that faulty collagen is also lining their blood vessels.
Exactly, which makes them prone to dangerous ruptures.
Okay, here is my absolute favorite myth from the reading. Knuckle cracking.
Yes.
We have all been warned since we were kids that cracking your knuckles will inevitably grind away your joints and give you arthritis. The story of how this was debunked involves a physician named Donald Unger, and it is just amazing.
Donald Unger's story is a testament to true scientific stubbornness. In 1998, he published a paper detailing a 60-year self-experiment.
60 years.
Yes. For 6 decades, he cracked the knuckles of only his left hand at least twice a day. He never cracked his right hand.
Decades of dedication just to prove a point to his mother, probably.
Most likely. And he found absolutely no difference in arthritis prevalence between the two hands. He actually won the Ig Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2009 for this work.
Okay, but if it's not bones grinding together and it's not damaging the cartilage, what physically creates that massive popping sound?
It's a physical phenomenon called cavitation, which was definitively mapped out by an MRI study in 2015.
How does it work?
Well, when you physically pull on your finger to stretch the joint capsule, you rapidly increase the internal volume of the synovial cavity.
Right, you're making more space.
Exactly. And according to fluid dynamics, increasing the volume rapidly decreases the pressure inside the synovial fluid. This sudden extreme pressure drop causes dissolved gases, mostly nitrogen and carbon dioxide, to rapidly come out of solution and form a microscopic gas-filled cavity.
A bubble.
A bubble. And the loud popping sound is simply the acoustic shock wave of that cavity forming in the fluid.
That is so cool. You are basically pulling a vacuum inside your finger joint, and the fluid boils into a gas bubble for a split second.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
But why can't you crack it again right away? There's always that waiting period.
Right, that is the refractory period. Once the bubble forms, the gases are no longer dissolved in the fluid. It takes roughly 20 minutes for those gases to physically dissolve back into the synovial fluid under normal pressure.
Ah, okay.
So until they dissolve, you can't create another pressure differential, meaning you just can't cavitate the joint again.
Okay, so cracking doesn't ruin your cartilage. But if you do damage it through acute injury or, decades of wear and tear, we hit a really grim biological reality, which is the cartilage healing misconception.
This is a tough one.
People assume that if they damage a joint, it will just heal over time, like a cut on your arm or a fractured bone.
Yeah, but that assumption completely ignores the tissue's fundamental biology. The hyaline cartilage that coats the ends of our bones and synovial joints is avascular.
Meaning it has zero direct blood supply, no arteries delivering nutrients, no veins carrying away waste.
Exactly.
So if there is no blood flow, how does the tissue stay alive?
It relies on a mechanical sponge effect. The cartilage matrix is filled with water and structural proteins. So when you walk or bear weight, the physical compression literally squishes cellular waste out of the cartilage and into the surrounding synovial cavity.
Like wringing out a sponge.
Yes. And then when you take the weight off, the cartilage expands and sucks fresh synovial fluid, which is packed with oxygen and nutrients, back into its matrix.
Which totally explains why doctors always tell arthritis patients to keep moving even when their joints hurt. Movement is literally how the joint eats. Without compression and release, the cartilage starves.
Precisely. But because it lacks a dedicated vascular highway, it doesn't get that rapid delivery of immune cells, inflammatory mediators, and building blocks required for actual tissue repair.
So it's just too slow.
Way too slow. Because of this slow diffusion-based metabolism, cartilage heals agonizingly slowly. And in the case of major tears, it simply cannot repair itself fully.
This is why osteoarthritis, which is the mechanical wear and tear of that avascular cartilage, is a degenerative one-way street. Once that biological shock absorber is worn down right to the bone, the body cannot pave over it with new cartilage.
It can't.
And just to clarify from the text, this mechanism is entirely different from rheumatoid arthritis.
Oh, completely. Osteoarthritis is sheer mechanical wear. Rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune condition.
Okay.
In rheumatoid, the body's own immune system mistakenly attacks the synovial membrane that lines the joint capsule. That causes systemic inflammation, fluid buildup, and rapid joint destruction, regardless of how much mechanical wear there is.
Wow. So what does this all mean for us? Why does this deep dive into joint classification and vascular mechanics actually matter to you listening right now?
Well, the stakes of this biology are incredibly high. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 U.S. adults has some form of diagnosed arthritis.
That's a huge portion of the population.
Yeah, and well over 1 million total hip and knee replacements happen annually in the U.S. alone. The classification system we've explored today, fibrous versus synovial, mobility versus stability, it directly dictates modern medical treatment.
Right.
A physical therapist designs a completely different rehabilitation protocol for a dislocated shoulder, which is a highly mobile, low-stability synovial joint, compared to, say, a sprained ankle syndesmosis, which is a fibrous joint that wasn't supposed to move much in the first place.
Every time you stretch before a run, or every time you pop a knuckle and wait for those gases to dissolve, or hear a coach talk about improving your range of motion, you are witnessing a 2,000-year-old classification system in action inside your own body.
Galen's ghost is still lingering in your gym class.
Exactly. It's just a perfect synthesis of ancient medical history, mechanical engineering, and cellular biology.
It really is.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on what we just discussed regarding that avascular cartilage. We know that our joints rely on a strict mechanical trade-off, and we know that the cartilage inside them relies on this sponge-like diffusion that essentially prevents it from repairing itself once the structural matrix breaks down. So, is the modern epidemic of osteoarthritis just a sign that human joints were mechanically engineered for much shorter, ancient lifespans? Are we simply outliving our own biological shock absorbers?
That's a really good point. If the structural and metabolic limits of hyaline cartilage are biologically fixed, then living well into our 80s and 90s pushes that organic material far beyond its evolutionary warranty.
Which makes you wonder, is the era of bionic titanium joint replacements not just a medical treatment for an injury, but the inevitable next step in human evolution? Something to think about the next time you smile, and remember that you are flashing a mouth full of fibrous joints. That's our deep dive for today. Keep wondering, keep moving, and we will see you next time.